Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our series of lessons on how to say numbers in English. Today, we're going to talk about the zero. When you hear English-speaking people say numbers, you might often hear them saying, "oh," and you might wonder, well, what number are they talking about? Was there a number that Teacher Frank forgot to tell us about, you might ask? In today's lesson, we're going to find out what that's all about. Let's talk about the zero. Well, as it turns out, as I looked back on our series on numbers, I discovered that I actually did forget to teach you not so much about the O, but about the zero. Oops, my bad. We just kind of started out with number one and kept right on going through our lessons until we got into the trillions, and we never really did stop to talk that much about the zero. We used the zero. You probably saw the zero on the screen here on our wall a lot. We did mention about the zero a little bit, but we never really included it in our vocabulary words. Sorry about that. This is the zero. And I'm sure that you probably already know about the zero and its function from using it in your own language. As you went through school, I'm sure in your country, your language, your culture, you also use the zero, and you know how important it is. But maybe let's just review the importance of the zero for a moment before we go on and find out about the O and the other ways that people who speak English can state the zero. The zero can stand for nothing. Or in English math, we might say null or nil. If you are doing a math problem, for example, like 5 take away 5, what is the result? What is your answer when you take 5 away from 5? Well, you are left with 0, nothing, none, nil, null. Some might also use the words not or ought for this usage of zero in math. Another very important function of the zero that we've already discovered in our previous lessons is that it is used as a placeholder when we are writing out big numbers or calculating big math problems. Before people figured out the concept of using a zero, writing out numbers and doing math problems were a lot more difficult. Just ask the Romans. If you've ever looked at their system, you will know that it was quite complex. It used letters of the alphabet instead of numbers. Have you seen these? For example, instead of 3, 4, 8, if you were writing this number back in the days of the Roman Empire, this is how it would look. C, C, C. C stands for 100. And to illustrate 300, you had to do 3 C's. And then, of course, the X is to 10. And so this is what the 3, 4, 8 looks like. Aren't you glad that we have the zero? The zero helps us know how to write and say numbers correctly and efficiently into the tens, the hundreds, the thousands, the millions, the billions, and the trillions. As we learned in our last lesson, If we see 10, we know that we're in the tens. When we see 40 like this together, we know right away that we should use the vocabulary that we learned for the tens and say 40. It's not 40. That's not how we would say this usually. It's 40. When we see this number, we know that because there are now 2 zeros, that we are in the hundreds. And we would not say 400. We wouldn't say 40. We simply say 400. Because there are 2 zeros, we know we're in the hundreds. So when we see this number, we know that we need to say 400. And on it goes. 4,000, 40,000, 400,000. And then once you see 6 zeros, you know that you are now into the millions. 4 million. 9 zeros, and you know that we're into the billions. 12 zeros, and you know that we are into the trillions. So that is one way that the zero helps us. One other very important way that the zero is helpful to us when we say or write numbers is how it can act as a placeholder inside a number. We saw an example of this in our last lesson. And by the way, I should say, if you have just stumbled on this lesson here on YouTube, you might want to check out the other lessons that we have made prior to this one in this series on English numbers. It's real easy to find it. Just look for our channel icon just below this video, and then just click or tap on that little icon, and this will take you to our channel at YouTube. And when you have arrived at our channel, the next step is just to look right up at the top of your screen, or if you're on your phone, for the menu item at the top called Playlists. Click on that, just tap on that, and you'll see a number of playlists there for our channel, but one of them will be called Numbers in English. Just tap on that, and then you'll be presented with all of the lessons that we have grouped together that talk about numbers in English. And we'll be adding more there, so you may want to come back later to see the others that we've added in this series. Another good way to know that you'll see these as we release them is to subscribe to our channel. I noticed the other day that most of the people that watch these videos here have never yet subscribed to our channel. And that is really helpful. When you subscribe to the channel, YouTube is likely to let you know each time we release another video. If you want to really be sure that YouTube will let you know, be sure to click the little bell besides the subscribe button there, and they'll let you know. But let's get back to our lesson. Let's say you saw a number on your calculator or in a book that looks like this, and someone asked you to read it out. How would you read it? Well, first of all, we'll remember from a previous lesson that when you see a comma like this, and you know, and you can tell there's only one comma, then we know that the number just before the comma should be expressed as 1,000. So if it's 5 like this, we know to say 5,000. But how do we finish this number up? Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky when there's a 0 like this. Because there's a 0 here instead of a number between 1 and 9, we know right away what we should do, and that is skip the hundreds altogether. We won't say 100 at all. we're going to go right to the tens. So we will say 5,045. How would you say this number? Go ahead and try and say it out loud. That's right. Because of the two zeros, we don't say either the hundreds or the tens. We go right to the ones. And so we say 5,003. Let's try one more. This might be a little bit more difficult, but I want you to give it a try. If you saw a number like this, how would you say it? Do you want to try it? I'll give you a moment to try and say it out loud, and then we'll see if you're right. It has a lot of zeros, I know. How do the zeros help us know how to say this number? Well, first of all, let's take a look at the commas. How many commas are there? Because there are two commas, we know that the group of numbers before the first comma should be expressed as a number that's in the millions, right? 340 million, right? We know that when the zero is in the last of the group of three, that we will then switch to using the vocabulary words that we learned when we were learning the vocabulary for the tens. You remember them? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90. That's what we need to use here. If you're still not sure how to say these, then maybe you should go back in our playlist like we showed you and be sure and learn those, because whenever you're using or trying to say numbers, you'll need to know how to say the tens very well. So 340 million. And because the next digit is a zero in our next group of three numbers, we know that we can skip right over the hundreds here and go right to the tens when we express this next group of three. The group that is in the thousands. So we say 340 million 78,000. And then because we now see that the next two numbers are zeros, we know that we can skip right over the hundreds, skip right over the tens in that group, and go right straight to the ones. So we would say 340 million 78,009. See how important those zeros are and how we need to know how to use them. Okay, so now we've talked about the zero, things we should have probably mentioned in our last lesson. But now for today's lesson, I want us to go on and talk about the O. Why is it that some English speakers say O instead of zero? I'm sure you've probably heard this. You ask someone for their phone number, and they might say something like, it's 905-236-8005. Or they might say 8005 at the end. It's that first three numbers, the area code, that people often will say O instead of zero. It's 905-236-8005. You know that they're giving you a number. Why are they saying O? What is O, you might ask? Or perhaps someone is telling you their address. And they might say something, I live at 805 Elm Street. Or when they're giving you their zip code, they might say and my zip code is 90489. What is this O that everyone keeps saying? Why do they say it O? You've probably caught on that they mean zero, but you may wonder, well, why do they say O? Should I start saying O when I see a zero, just to be like everybody else? Well, before you start doing that, let's talk about it a little bit and first understand maybe how it came to be that O is often substituted for zero when English speakers are giving a number. Why would people say O instead of zero? Well, there have been a couple of reasons that people have given as to how this came about, that people in Canada and the United States substitute O for zero. Some say it is because the zero looks a lot like an O. And so people just started saying it that way, and it kind of caught on. Another theory is that it is because of an old English word for zero, ought. Ought. We'll put it up on the screen here. Ought. That used to be a word that people back in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s in English would use for zero. They would say ought. And also in the 1900s, I remember my father using the word ought when I was a boy, and that's back in the 1960s, 1970s. Ought. Well, some people found that this word ought and ate were easy to get mixed up. Ought and ate. They sound a little bit alike. And so when people were on the phone or they were dictating a number and they said ought, people might mistake it for an 8 and write down 8. And so there was some confusion here, especially in the early days of telephones. I don't know if you know this, but back in the early days, you had to connect with an operator. You would take the handle of your phone off the wall and just ring the operator and then tell the operator the number that you wanted to call. And so if you were saying, operator, please connect me with 046 89 ought. Well, they might get some of those oughts and eights mixed up. And so in the early days of telephone, it is said that the operators encouraged people to use O instead of ought. O is the first letter of ought, right? And so maybe they were just telling people to abbreviate the ought and just say O instead of ought when they were referring to the number we now call zero. And it just caught on. And now today, long after we have stopped using ought, the use of O continues. It is interesting, fascinating to me at least, how languages change over time. And people start using things like O instead of zero. But probably the best theory that I have found is that O is just a short way of saying zero. Did you hear the last part of zero? What is it? O, right? Zero. English speakers, you've probably discovered, just love to abbreviate things, make their words shorter. And over the years, especially in Canada and the United States, so many English words have been shortened. You may remember a couple of lessons ago, we talked about how to say hello to somebody and give them a greeting. Well, hello has been shortened to hi and hey. And some people just say, And so it's just something that happens in English. People shorten their words down. So just keep that in mind. Whenever you hear someone giving their phone number or street number or US zip code and they say O, just know that they are meaning 0. Now, just because they say it that way does not mean that you need to say it that way. You can tell someone that you live at 308 Elm Street and they are not going to think that you have just said something wrong. It's okay. 308 Elm Street is fine. They will understand you. They will not think that you're saying it wrong. It's perfectly fine to say, use the 0 instead of an O. For example, when you're giving somebody your phone number, no problem to say 905-368-0098. Zip codes can be said with zeros instead of O's, and nobody's going to look at you funny. Now, I should point out that here in Canada, we have a different system for our mailing address zip code. We call it the postal code, and it is a mix of letters and numbers. It goes letter, number, letter, number, letter, number. I'll put one up on the screen here. When you're saying a postal code in Canada, it is a good idea to use 0 instead of O so that no one will get confused about what you mean. For example, this Canadian postal code should be read L10-3T0 to avoid any kind of confusion. So that's the story behind why people say O for 0. Before we go, I would like for us to think about some other common ways that English speakers might say 0. Did you know that there are about 30 different ways to say 0 in English? We won't, in this lesson, talk about all 30 ways to use it, but let's just take a look at some of the most common. Null. This is used in math. 0 times 8 is how much? Null. The value of 0 times 8 is null. You can say 0 too. That's fine. But in math, you can also say null. Sometimes you might see it written nil. Some variations of this throughout the English-speaking countries are also not or not. Notice the difference in spelling. Ought and ought, the difference in spelling. All of these mean 0 or nothing, or the sum in math of an equation that leaves nothing. Nil, null, not, ought, they all mean 0. But there are also some other ways to say nothing. Sometimes, it just doesn't sound right to answer someone's question with the English word 0. If my wife asks, "How many eggs do we have left?" I probably wouldn't answer 0. I might. It wouldn't be wrong to say that if we were out of eggs, but I would more likely say none. How many eggs do we have left? None. We have none. We're totally out of eggs. I might ask my wife, "How much money do you have left after your shopping trip?" She probably wouldn't reply 0. She would more likely say none or nothing. I have nothing left after my shopping trip. She might even say, "I have no money left." No? What? I have no money left? Isn't that interesting? In this case, the English word no is actually a substitute word for 0. Interesting. I have 0 money left. I have no money left. How did something like that happen in English? How did no suddenly become a word for zero, another way of saying zero? Well, again, it might be just a short way of saying none or nothing. Abbreviate these words. What do you have? No. I have no money left. But then there are the slang words for zero. Do you know what slang means? That is a way of talking about words that aren't really official words. They might not even be in some dictionaries, or when you're typing them in your word processor, they might show up as being spelled incorrectly because they're not official English words. And yet people use them so often. When you're talking to people at work, or your friends at a party, or you're watching TV, these slang words are used so much that it's important that you know them and understand that all of these words actually mean zero, or can mean zero. And sometimes you just have to kind of put it in the context of the rest of the sentence to know that that's what the English speaker was talking about, that they really meant this slang word to be used as a zero. And this is where you'll get most of your 30 different ways to say zero. It could be that sports scores and sports announcers may be responsible for this wide variety of slang ways to say zero. If you were a sports announcer, you would probably want to come up with some other ways to say zero too. You're talking about the scores all day long, day after day. You'd want to come up with some variety for zero, right? So you might hear them saying something like, the score is 5-zip, or 3 zilch. Zip, zilch, kind of just a different way of saying zero. Zip, zilch. You might hear a friend say, oh, our team got Zippo goals last night. Zippo. They got nada, which is basically Spanish for nothing. They got nada, nothing. Nothing but a big goose egg. Goose egg is actually another slang word or synonym for zero. Goose egg, because goose eggs are kind of in the shape of a zero, right, or an O. Some sports might even have very peculiar or specific words for zero. Have you ever watched a tennis game and heard the score to be 15 love, 30 love? What is love? Well, in the case of tennis, love stands for zero. It is a substitute word for zero. Sometimes when people are trying to express nothing in a creative way, they might say diddly or diddly squat. How much cash do you have on you? I got diddly squat, your friend might say. How much work did you get done while I was gone? Diddly might be the response as they play their computer game. I got diddly done, diddly squat. Well, there you have it. Everything that you probably ever wanted to know about zero and the different ways that English speakers may say it. If you have heard zero said in other ways, please let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this lesson, please give us a like and share it with your friends who may also be learning English. In our next lesson, we're going to talk about some of the alternate ways of saying numbers. Have you ever heard someone say something like, I'm thinking of buying a car. It's going for only $4,500. And you might wonder, what? How much is it going for? $4,500? Or have you ever heard someone read off a number like this? 6,508. And you might be saying, that's not the way Teacher Frank taught us to say it. What does it mean? He always wants us to say 508. Why do some people say just 508? Well, be sure to come back for our next lesson on English numbers. The best way that you'll be sure that you will see this video when it's released is to subscribe to our channel. And if you ring that bell, YouTube will be sure to let you know each time we release a new lesson here at Study English with Frank. See you next time. Bye for now.